So chroma key is the process of removing a specific color from typically a background element in a production that you're editing. In instructional video, this is often used to superimpose the speaker or the instructor on top of the actual instructional content. Certainly you've seen that in the videos in this particular course. And in this tutorial, I want to show you how two different applications, video editing applications, actually implement this function, Premiere Elements and Camtasia. Both do it very well, but very differently. Now, before we get started though, I want to remind you of 4 conditions that you need to meet. Otherwise, you're just going to get frustrated trying to do this. So as we saw in the video for this particular module, let me remind you of a couple things. First of all, you need a solid background color. It has to be completely even. It has to be the same color. A painted wall is ideal, especially one that doesn't have a very shiny finish. A flat or matte finish is much better than a glossy finish, but it has to be perfectly evenly painted. If there are any differences, it's just not going to work. It needs to be a solid color. Second, it needs to be extremely well lit. You need to bring in some extra lighting and have it extremely bright. The color of that, of course, of the wall, needs to be totally different from anything you're wearing, and it needs to be totally different from skin tone. Otherwise, you're just going to paint yourself out of the entire picture, and it's going to look crazy. So the best colors typically are fluorescent green or some kind of bright shade of green or something similar with blue. Not a royal blue, a little bit lighter than that, and not a sky blue, something in between. Those tend to work best for extracting, but again, you have to make sure that you're not wearing anything that's painted. Otherwise, that's going to get keyed out as well, and it's going to look ridiculous. So with your clothing, in addition to that, I would also mention that you don't want to wear any stripes or any patterns. Those typically don't video very well anyway, at least on consumer cameras. So you want to keep your clothing color solid also, but not the color of the wall behind you. And most importantly, make sure that your camera is shooting in 16:9 mode, if it even has an option to do anything different. And also, when you create your slideshow in your presentation app like PowerPoint, make sure it is also set to 16:9, because what you're going to want to do is shove all the content over on one side or the other. For example, in this slide that you're looking at here, the content is all the way over on the left-hand side. Why would we do that? Well, that's because the video is going to go over here on the right-hand side. So you've got to create some space for the video that you're going to superimpose later. So with those 3 things said, let's take a look. Let's do Camtasia first. I think that's a little bit easier. Let me show you how that works. So let me set this up for you here. Now, it's always weird having to edit myself, but I don't have any green screen footage of anybody else. Now, I shot this in our studio, but you can do this at home, as we said before, if you light your subject really well and you do it in front of a solid colored painted wall. I've actually got a real green screen, and you can see up here on the left-hand side, the camera doesn't quite fit everything, and that's okay. I can crop that out later, and I'll show you how to do that. But the point that I want to make here is that I'm recording the video totally from the camera. Now, I've got an external mic, a lavalier microphone set up here. Most of you won't have access to that, and for this course, it's not really going to matter. But you'll definitely get better quality audio if you use that. But the point that I want to make here though is that when I'm setting this up, I'm shooting the camera independent of the computer. You might be shooting using your phone camera, and that's fine. But I'm also recording the PowerPoint at the exact same time. In other words, I'm capturing the screen in Camtasia while I'm capturing the video with the camera. And I want to show you how I synchronize this. It's really important. Let me play just a couple seconds here. Please pardon the cheesy grin. Okay, I just clapped there. Oh, great facial expression. That's awesome. I just clapped there. Why would I do that? Well, look down here in the timeline, and you'll see 2 spikes. You'll see one right here on the video, and then one right here on the PowerPoint screen capture that I grabbed in Camtasia. Why do you do that? Well, it's the same reason in professional productions they use a clapboard. It's to get this spike in the audio waveform. Because what that does then is it allows me simply to come in here and just drag that up so that they're synchronized. When they're stacked up like this, that means they're in perfect temporal synchronicity. And that means that when I'm talking, whatever I'm saying up here is going to match whatever PowerPoint content is being displayed. And that's really important, especially if you're using progressive disclosure. When I talk about a specific bullet point, I want that bullet point to be up on the screen. So that, again, the way we synchronize this is just to drag these clips around so that the spikes are stacked up perfectly on top of each other. And once that's set up, I can then remember this. And typically what I like to do is to trim up to that particular point and then flush them over here so that everything is nice and flush up against the start of the timeline. And then at the end of my production, I don't really start talking until right here. I think right here I'm just kind of clearing my throat or something stupid. And then right about here is when I start talking. So eventually I will trim up to that point right here. And whoops, I missed, sorry. And now I have two perfectly synchronized clips, and then I can go ahead and flush them back over here. So everything's ready to go. Now, back to the whole point of this tutorial, which is to take out the color. So here's how we do that. I have to bring up the video. Tell you what, let me squeeze over here just a little bit. The Visual Properties tab. And in the Visual Properties tab, I have an option to remove a color. So I'm going to click that checkbox and then go to the Color pull-down menu and choose Select Color. That gives me this ink dropper that I can then place somewhere over here. And I usually try to do it around the subject's hair, because hair is always the hardest thing to extract, and sometimes you'll just get this green halo, this green glow around them. So I'm going to click somewhere around that, and you can see what happens. It did a pretty good job using the default settings, but if you look down here, you'll see I have some pixelation right there, so I got to clean that up. And that's easily done down here in the tolerance and softness controls. And typically I have to reduce the tolerance just a little and reduce the softness just a little. And that looks pretty good. You can still see a little bit of green, but it's functional. Next step, I want to position this. So I'm going to click and drag. Whoops, they're both selected, so that didn't work. Okay, I'm going to deselect. I just double click there to deselect. Now I can come in here and you can see I've only got the video selected. And I'm going to drag that over and I'm going to make sure it's appropriately positioned, something like that on the screen. Whoops, a little too high. There we go. Okay, so once I've got that positioned, you might notice I still have that piece of the screen here. Now this didn't get keyed out because it's not green, it's white. And the easiest way to get rid of that permanently is to use the crop tool. And it's hard for you to see on my monitor here, but I'm going to grab the crop tool right there. And then with that tool selected, I'm going to put my mouse right on top of the handle and simply drag over until it's just about gone. I don't want to go too far, because then if I were to stick my hand over here, my hand's going to get chopped off and you're not going to be able to see it. So you have to be very, very careful that I don't crop all the way over here, because then I start cutting myself out of the picture. You see how that works? So I'm just going to keep it right there. And that's it. Now if I were to play this video, blah, 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 okay, there I go. Everything's nice and clean. We don't have any more pixelation down here. And the PowerPoint content displays over on the left-hand side. So this is going to end up looking really good, and then I'm ready to export it like I normally would any other screen capture composition. The only difference here this time is that we have multiple tracks. So that's how Camtasia does it. So Premiere does it a little bit differently. Here's how Premiere does the keying. I'm going to go ahead and drag my clips down here like I normally do. I'm going to put my PowerPoint down below. And you can see the audio spikes there. These are in stereo. That's just the audio from the screencast. Then I'm going to drag my video down and put it there. And notice what happens. Premiere automatically detects that, hey, there's a solid background here. Do you want me to automatically apply the video merge effect? Now, you can try this, but I've never been able to make this work. Watch what happens. I click yes, and see how it's all fuzzy and ugly up here. It just doesn't work very well. If I go to the Applied Effects menu, I can play around with the tolerance settings here, but I've never been able to get video merge to look right. I love, in theory, that it automates it, but it just doesn't seem to work very well. So I'm going to undo that, and I'll do it manually. I'm going to go to the Effects menu, and I'm going to choose from the pull-down menu here, this giant list, I'm going to choose Keying. And there are a lot of different keys that we can use to apply here. And I'm going to grab the green screen key because obviously I shot this in front of a green screen, and so it's calibrated to be very sensitive to the color green. There's also a blue screen key, and then you have a chroma key. If you have some odd color, you can choose chroma key and then use the ink dropper to select a specific color in your background. But for me, I'm going to use this green screen key because I know it's going to work. And so I'm going to drag it, whoops, and put it right on top of my clip, the video clip. And right out of the box, it does a pretty good job. Now I need to shove the video over just a little bit. So whoops, I need to double click. There we go. And then I'll use my arrow keys to get it fine-tuned a little bit. All right, right about there looks good. But you can see that I've got a little bit of pixelation here. You know, it does have a hard time picking, you know, segregating the orange from the black. And if you're wondering why I always wear a black shirt, it's simply for reasons like this. I have a dark background, and a black shirt blends into the background a little bit, but it's also more difficult to detect the deficiencies in the keying. And because we're not using professional tools here, I have to kind of find a happy medium, and that seems to work pretty well. Nevertheless, I have threshold and cutoff sliders here that I can play around with, and I've learned that if I drop the smoothing just a little bit, and if I drop the threshold just a little bit, it improves the contrast here between the two colors, so that it cleans it up. But notice that it did that at the expense of putting a shadow up there, so I would have to boost that back up, and maybe boost the smoothing back up just a hair, and just kind of have to play around with this until you find something that looks good. So after playing around with these settings and getting to where I can live with the quality, I've still got a little bit of fuzz down here. I can't seem to get rid of all of that, and that's one of the reasons I like using Camtasia for my keying. It just seems to be cleaner than Premiere, mostly because the studio where I shoot just doesn't have the best screen. If it were a real professional screen, it wouldn't have that problem. It'd be super clean. But I don't, and it seems like Camtasia is a little bit more forgiving. Anyway, I still have to get rid of that little piece of the screen that doesn't get keyed out because it's white and not green. So how do I crop this out? You saw how easy it was in Camtasia, and it's also very easy in Premiere Elements. I go back to my Effects tab, and I have to switch categories over to Transform. And there's a crop tool there, and I click and drag. It's an effect, not really a tool, and I click and drag it right on top of the video track. And the default settings are over here on the left hand side. Notice that it doesn't by default have a visual set of handles that you can grab and drag over here on top of the image. Instead, you're simply manipulating these boundaries, and I actually prefer this. It's a little bit more precise, and I don't move the clip around by accident. So all I'm going to do here is just move that down to the bottom, and then it's the left edge that I'm concerned about. That's this, see that little piece right there, right behind the T? If I click and drag that to the right, it's gone. Whoops, I missed. There we go. And now it's gone, but I've scalped myself here, so I need to go back up to the top and move that back up, so now everything is viewable. Notice on the right-hand side, if I take the right-hand slider and I go way out, I can chop myself off there. I'm going to go ahead and set it all the way to the edge. So the only thing that was wrong with this video was that little piece right there. And so I simply have to remove it using the left-hand tool. See how that works? All the other edges were fine right out of the box because they keyed appropriately, but it's just that little left top corner right there that I needed to get rid of. And I don't want to go all the way over here because watch what happens. I start erasing myself. And if I were to pick up my right hand, I might not make it all the way to the edge of the screen. So I have to just kind of find that boundary right where that little piece needs to be cut out of the way, and then that's as far over as I go. So that is chroma key, or green screen key rather, in Adobe Premiere Elements, as well as a little bit of cropping. Now don't forget, I still have to get my audio synchronized just like I did before, but that's real easy to do. You just slide everything to get the waveforms stacked up on each other and then trim accordingly. So good luck with this. Don't get frustrated. And again, remember those 4 conditions. You've got to have solid color, you've got to have great lighting, and you have to make sure that you dress appropriately for this. Good luck if you attempt this, and we'll be happy to support you in the forum if you need help.